What would you do if strangers were measuring your grandfather's property like they already owned it? I'm at a construction site when my neighbor Rosa texts me a photo that makes my stomach drop. White folks in expensive suits walking around my family's cabin with measuring tapes, while a realtor in designer heels points at the deck like she's calculating her commission. The bitter taste of cold coffee fills my mouth as I stare at these vultures circling what my grandfather built with his own hands. HOA President Patricia Whitmore's smug voicemail plays through my truck speakers. Just exploring community enhancement opportunities, Darius. I'm sure you understand. No, Patricia. I don't understand how you think you can sell what belongs to my family. But here's what I do understand: how to fight back when people think your skin color makes you an easy target. Let me back up and tell you how a decorated war veteran's legacy became ground zero for the ugliest kind of neighborhood politics. My name's Darius Washington, and that cabin they're trying to steal has been in my family for 38 years. My grandfather Samuel bought those 2 acres in 1986 with his disability pension from Vietnam. The man came home with shrapnel in his back and memories that never quit haunting him. But he found peace by that quiet lake, building every inch of that cabin with weathered hands that had seen too much war. "This is our forever home, Darius," he'd tell me every summer when I'd help him seal the deck. "The sweet scent of wood stain would stick to our clothes for days. Nobody can take what you build with honest sweat and sacrifice." Samuel died 4 years ago, leaving me the cabin and every story those walls held. It's where my 15-year-old daughter Zoe escapes when her mum and I can't stop arguing about custody schedules. It's where I go every weekend to remember what silence sounds like after 50-hour construction weeks filled with power tools and shouting supervisors. That property predates their precious HOA by 25 years. Grandpa's deed shows clear ownership long before these suburban gatekeepers moved in and decided everyone needed matching everything. Here's what nobody tells you about moving into certain neighborhoods. Sometimes the welcome wagon comes loaded with clipboards instead of cookies. Enter Patricia Whitmore, HOA president and professional neighborhood watchdog. She moved here from Connecticut 3 years ago, drives a silver Lexus that gets detailed weekly, and thinks our rustic community needs significant improvement. Translation: she wants to price out anyone who doesn't look like her country club friends. Patricia's got perfectly manicured nails that she uses to point at violations, and she speaks in legal terminology designed to intimidate people who didn't go to law school. I've watched her measure neighbors' grass with an actual ruler while taking photos for her violation files. Can you guess what her first target was when the Washington family didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection? 6 months ago, a citation appeared on my cabin door, calling my grandfather's workshop a non-conforming rustic structure that detracts from neighborhood aesthetic standards. Apparently, hand-built craftsmanship from a Vietnam veteran doesn't meet her architectural requirements. She demanded $18,000 in compliance fees or complete reconstruction to match her idea of acceptable housing. When I told her exactly what she could do with her compliance fees, using language my grandfather would have appreciated, she escalated to today's real estate circus. The realtor touring my property turns out to be Patricia's sorority sister from some fancy college. The marketing materials described my family sanctuary as a prime development opportunity with tear-down potential for modern lakefront amenities. These people were literally discussing demolishing my grandfather's workshop to build a meditation studio. Do you know what makes my jaw clench every single night? They have zero legal standing. This is pure intimidation designed to pressure me into selling cheap, so Patricia can flip it to developers for 10 times what I'd get. But it's not just about money anymore. That cabin represents the last solid connection to my grandfather's memory. It's where Zoe feels safe when the world gets too loud and complicated. It's my weekend escape from job sites where everything is rushed and nothing is built to last. The rough texture of those hand-planed porch railings tells the story of a man who built things right the first time. The sound of morning birds calling across the water every sunrise. That's the piece Samuel fought a war to protect. The smell of coffee brewing in his old percolator still fills the kitchen every Saturday morning, mixing memories with hope. Now, Patricia wants to erase all of that for what? Property values? Neighborhood uniformity? Here's what's really happening. Other neighbors are watching, wondering if they're next on her hit list. Old Mrs. Rodriguez got a violation for her vegetable garden being too visible from the street. The Johnson family faces daily fines for parking their work truck in their own driveway. The community is holding its breath, waiting to see if regular folks can still live in places they've called home for decades, or if money and legal threats always win. What nobody expected was for Patricia to pick the wrong family to mess with. My grandfather didn't survive the jungles of Vietnam, so some HOA tyrant could steal his legacy because she didn't like having black neighbors. Time to show her what Samuel Washington's grandson learned about fighting back when people underestimate you. Patricia's next move came exactly 1 week after the realtor incident, and this time the racial undertones weren't even subtle. A formal letter on fake legal letterhead that would have made a real attorney laugh out loud. Notice of property abandonment and community safety violation, it screamed in bold letters. According to Patricia's creative interpretation of property law, my weekend-only use of the cabin constituted abandonment under Municipal Code 847.3b, particularly concerning given the transient nature of certain demographics in the area. She was threatening daily $500 fines starting in 30 days, unless I either moved there full-time or surrendered the deed for community benefit and safety. The smell of fresh toner from her expensive printer couldn't mask the stench of complete racism disguised as legal procedure. She'd copied the letter to County Commissioner Bradley Walsh, her tennis partner at the country club, with a handwritten note about maintaining neighborhood character and property values. The message was clear: I'm connected to power, you're not, so roll over and disappear quietly. But here's what Patricia didn't know about construction workers, especially black ones who've dealt with this garbage their whole careers. We solve problems for a living, and we don't panic when foundations crack. We dig deeper to find the real problem. I spent my lunch break at the county clerk's office, a musty basement that smells like decades of bureaucratic coffee stains and forgotten dreams. The clerk, Beverly, a black woman who'd seen every property scam in the book, pulled out deed records going back to when this area was nothing but farmland and fishing spots. Your grandfather was smart, Beverly said, her weathered fingers tracing the original survey lines with respect. Look at this. My heart started pounding as she showed me Samuel's 1986 survey. Our property line extended 75 feet further north than anyone realized, including Patricia, that fancy HOA community mailbox cluster she was so proud of, sitting smack in the middle of my grandfather's land. Even better, the deed included a clause I'd never noticed before: grandfathered property rights in perpetuity with all municipal exemptions maintained. In lawyer speak, this land belongs to the Washington family forever, and no HOA that didn't exist when we bought it can change that. Are you ready for the best part? The real bombshell came from my neighbor Rosa that evening. She knocked on my door with homemade tamales and information that made my jaw drop. That Whitmore woman offered me $500, Rosa whispered, glancing around like we were planning a revolution. Wanted me to take pictures of your violations, your truck, your visitors, anything she could use to build a case about undesirable elements in the neighborhood. She handed me a handwritten list that made my blood boil. The Morrison family, black like us, forced to sell after months of harassment about their non-conforming fence. The Patterson cottage, owned by an elderly white veteran, currently under attack for having too many decorative elements. The Hendricks clan, Mexican-American, facing daily fines for parking their landscaping truck in their own driveway. She's not just coming after you, Darius, Rosa said, the crunch of autumn leaves under our feet as we walked my property line. She wants to clear out anyone who doesn't drive a luxury car or fit her idea of the right kind of neighbor. Then Rosa dropped the real bomb that changed everything. I've been documenting everything she's been doing: photos, recordings, copies of her harassment letters to other families. I was a high school principal for 25 years. I know a racist bully when I see one. This sweet 65-year-old teacher had been running a one-woman intelligence operation against Patricia for months. She had evidence of systematic harassment, discriminatory targeting based on race and class, and what looked suspiciously like a coordinated plan to force minority property sales. But here's the part that'll make you smile with satisfaction. Rosa grinned like she was about to reveal state secrets. I did some research of my own. Your HOA president isn't quite what she seems. Patricia Whitmore, the woman terrorizing our neighborhood with legal threats and racial dog whistles, had her Connecticut real estate license suspended for discriminatory practices. Her perfect suburban lifestyle was built on maxed-out credit cards and a mortgage she was 4 months behind on. She wasn't some powerful legal eagle. She was a desperate fraud using intimidation tactics because she had nothing else left and nowhere else to run. That night, I installed security cameras at every corner of my property. Motion-activated, night vision, professional grade, the kind we use on construction sites to catch equipment thieves. If Patricia wanted to play surveillance games, I'd play them with better equipment and decades of experience dealing with people who think they can intimidate black men. I also called Tom Rodriguez, a Latino attorney who specialized in property rights and civil rights violations, with a particular hatred for HOA bullies who used racial coding. "Bring me everything," he said after I explained the situation. "These fake legal letters, the survey documents, your neighbor's evidence file, and especially anything showing discriminatory language or targeting. This woman just picked a fight with the wrong family and the wrong community." My construction crew offered backup. Blue-collar solidarity runs deep when suburban bullies attack one of your own, especially when race becomes part of the equation. Even Zoe got involved, helping me organize all the documents while asking sharp questions like, "Dad, is it illegal to discriminate against people in housing stuff?" Smart kid. She already understood we weren't just fighting for our cabin, we were fighting for everyone Patricia had targeted, because they didn't fit her narrow vision of acceptable neighbors. The sweet scent of pine needles filled the evening air as I sat on Grandpa's porch reviewing our evidence. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this whole mess started. Confidence mixed with righteous anger. Patricia thought she was playing chess while I played checkers, using her race and connections as automatic advantages. She was about to discover that this construction worker was pretty damn good at chess too, and I had something she'd never understand, a community that had my back when the game got dirty. 2 weeks after my courthouse discovery, Patricia played her next card, and this time she brought reinforcements that made her intentions crystal clear. I was replacing warped deck boards on the cabin when a white county truck pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Harold Wessler, code enforcement officer, clipboard in hand and a look on his face like he'd rather be anywhere else. Behind him emerged Patricia, wearing her power suit like armor, and that smug smile that made my teeth itch. "Mr. Washington," Harold began, clearly reading from prepared notes, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We've received complaints about unpermitted structures on this property. Specifically, that workshop appears to violate current building codes and may require immediate remediation. The workshop, my grandfather's pride and joy, built with his own hands in 1987, solid as a rock, better constructed than half the McMansions going up around here." "What kind of remediation?" I asked, though I already knew this was another shakedown with racial undertones. Patricia stepped forward like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. $30,000 in permits and code compliance updates, or demolition within 30 days. The structure simply doesn't meet current safety standards for this neighborhood demographic. The acrid smell of Harold's cigarettes mixed with Patricia's expensive perfume created a nauseating cloud in the crisp morning air. I could taste the metallic edge of anger building in my throat. But here's what working construction for 20 years teaches you, especially as a black man. You learn to keep your cool when people try to screw you with fake emergencies and coded language. Instead of exploding like they expected, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Harold," I said calmly, "can you show me exactly which codes this 35-year-old building violates? And can you explain why this particular property needs special demographic considerations?" Harold shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Patricia like he was looking for permission to speak. "Well, there's no permit on file with current systems, and given the neighborhood transition patterns, because the county lost records during the computer transition in 2018, I replied. "But I bet the original contractor still has copies." "And what exactly do you mean by transition patterns?" Patricia's smile faltered just slightly. She hadn't expected me to ask direct questions about her coded language or to do my homework. Do you know what the most satisfying moment was? Watching her realize that this black man wasn't going to be intimidated by bureaucratic theater and thinly veiled racial references. That afternoon, I called every contractor who'd worked this area in the mid-80s. The third call hit gold. Jimmy Santos, now 71 and retired, but still sharp as a tack. Samuel Washington's cabin. "Hell yes, I remember that job." Jimmy laughed with genuine warmth. "Your granddad was a perfectionist and a gentleman. Made me redo the foundation twice because one corner was off by half an inch. That workshop was built to withstand a hurricane, and he paid me in cash with a handshake. Honorable man." Jimmy still had his project files from 1987, including the original building permit, inspection reports, and final approval signatures. Everything Patricia claimed didn't exist, sitting in a dusty filing cabinet in Jimmy's garage. Sometimes the best defense against bureaucratic bullies is better paperwork than they have, and old contractors who remember when a man's word and craftsmanship meant something. But the real eye-opener came when Harold called me that evening, his voice hushed like he was worried about being overheard. "Darius, I need to tell you something off the record," he said. "Those violations I cited today, they're questionable at best. Mrs. Whitmore has been pressuring me to find problems with certain properties, especially ones owned by, well, families like yours." Harold was up for re-election next year. Patricia had been making campaign donations and hosting fundraisers, but also making it clear that her support came with expectations about maintaining neighborhood standards. "I can't say this officially," Harold continued, "but if you file a formal complaint about harassment and discrimination, I'll back you up. This isn't how code enforcement should work, and it damn sure isn't how we should treat veterans' families." The next morning brought my favorite kind of surprise: security camera footage of Patricia's midnight gardening project with a racist twist. At 1:23 a.m., clear as daylight, on infrared video, Patricia crept onto my property carrying a bag of what looked like drug paraphernalia and gang-related graffiti stencils. I watched her carefully place empty baggies and spray paint what appeared to be gang symbols on the side of my grandfather's workshop, then use a measuring tape to mark their exact positions for photographing later. Her plan was as transparent as it was disgusting: plant evidence of drug activity and gang presence on my property, photograph it the next day as proof that certain demographics were bringing down neighborhood safety, then use that as grounds for emergency property seizure. But my grandfather's survey put all her planted evidence 20 feet inside my boundaries. Patricia wasn't just trespassing and planting false evidence. She was committing multiple felonies while targeting a black family with racist stereotypes. Can you believe the arrogance? The smooth plastic of the camera housing felt cold under my fingers as I downloaded the footage. The bitter taste of early morning coffee couldn't wash away my grin as I watched Patricia literally bury herself deeper in legal trouble while revealing her true motivations. I forwarded the video to Tom Rodriguez, who nearly choked on his morning coffee laughing. "She's now committed criminal trespass, attempted fraud, conspiracy to file false reports, and what appears to be racially motivated evidence planting," he said. "This woman is building our civil rights case for us. The federal authorities are going to love this." Jimmy Santos delivered the original permits that afternoon, along with photos of the workshop construction and a sworn affidavit about the building's compliance with all 1987 codes. He also brought something unexpected: stories about my grandfather's reputation in the contractor community. "Samuel was respected by every worker in this county," Jimmy told me. "Black, white, Latino, didn't matter. He treated everyone fair and expected the same in return." What this woman's doing would have made him fighting mad. Rosa provided additional intelligence that painted an even uglier picture. Patricia had tried to pressure Martinez at the hardware store to refuse service to problem neighbors, specifically mentioning families with urban characteristics and transient work patterns. She'd also approached the local bank about reviewing loan applications more carefully for certain demographics in transitioning neighborhoods. "She's getting desperate," Rosa observed, watching from her kitchen window as Patricia drove slowly past my cabin for the 4th time that day. "Desperate racists make stupid mistakes." Harold officially withdrew the violation notice that Friday, citing incomplete information and need for further review. Patricia's power play had backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating me into compliance with her coded threats, she'd created a paper trail of harassment and given me criminal evidence of racial targeting. But I could feel her desperation growing, and desperate racists with connections are the most dangerous kind. The real war was just beginning, and this time the battlefield included federal civil rights law. 3 days after Harold withdrew the bogus violation, Patricia went nuclear with an attack that dropped any pretense about her real motivations. A process server knocked on my door at 6:30 a.m., clipboard thick with legal documents that made my morning coffee taste like ash. Patricia Whitmore versus Darius Washington, a lawsuit claiming my property devalued the entire neighborhood by $3 million collectively due to demographic shifts and cultural incompatibility. The accusations were breathtaking in their racist creativity. According to her complaint, I was creating a hostile environment through intimidation tactics, typical of urban demographics, and engaging in deliberate property neglect designed to facilitate neighborhood transition away from established community standards. She was seeking a temporary restraining order to prevent me from accessing my own land while the court sorted out her claims about public safety concerns related to changing neighborhood character. Her attorney was Marcus Webb from Steinberg, Webb and Associates, the kind of law firm that charges $600 an hour to intimidate working-class people into submission with legal language that danced around civil rights violations. Their letterhead alone probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and their reputation for defending discriminatory HOA practices was well known in legal circles. But desperation makes racist people sloppy, and Patricia had just made a massive miscalculation that would expose everything. I called Tom Rodriguez immediately. "Bring everything to my office today," he said, after I read him the complaint. "And I mean everything. Deeds, surveys, camera footage, financial records, and especially any evidence of discriminatory language or targeting. This woman just opened the door for us to file federal civil rights charges." While I was gathering documents, my buddy Marcus from the construction crew was doing some digging of his own. Marcus's cousin worked for a private investigation firm that specialized in discrimination cases, and family favors run deep in communities that face this kind of targeting together. "Your HOA queen is in serious financial trouble," Marcus reported that afternoon. "Bankruptcy filing shows she owes $220,000 in credit card debt, plus her mortgage is in default. But here's the interesting part. She's been getting mysterious payments from something called neighborhood preservation consultants." The pieces started clicking together like a well-built frame. Patricia wasn't just power-hungry and racist. She was financially desperate and being paid to clear out minority families. This whole campaign against long-time residents wasn't about community improvement. It was about demographic engineering for profit. Marcus's cousin had uncovered something even more disturbing. A development company called Lakeshore Properties had been quietly buying up properties from distressed minority families around the lake. 4 foreclosures in the past year, all purchased by shell companies that traced back to Lakeshore, all previously owned by Black or Latino families. Here's the kicker that made everything crystal clear. Lakeshore specialized in what they called community optimization. They moved into established diverse neighborhoods, partnered with corrupt HOAs to harass minority residents using coded language and selective enforcement, then swooped in to buy properties cheap when families couldn't afford the legal fights. The end result, whiter, wealthier neighborhoods sold as premium communities. I remembered something my grandfather used to say about racism. "When you see one cross burning, son, there are always more hiding in the darkness. You've got to shine light on all of them." That evening, I was reviewing documents in my kitchen when Tom called with news that made me nearly choke on my sandwich. "Darius, you're not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the excitement in his voice. "I've been researching your HOA's incorporation status, and we've got a huge problem, a massive problem for them." He'd discovered that the Willowbrook Homeowners Association was never properly incorporated under state law. The original filing from 2020 was rejected by the Secretary of State for incomplete paperwork and missing signatures. Patricia never corrected the deficiencies, meaning every citation she'd issued, every fine she'd collected, every enforcement action she'd taken over the past 3 years. All of it was legally meaningless. "An unincorporated HOA has no more legal authority than a book club," Tom explained. "She's been collecting fees and issuing penalties with zero legal standing. That's not overzealous enforcement, that's fraud. And when you add the discriminatory targeting based on race, we're looking at federal civil rights violations." The implications hit me like a load of concrete blocks falling off a truck. 43 families had been paying illegal fees averaging $3,800 each. Patricia had collected over $500,000 over 3 years with no legal right to do so, while specifically targeting minority families with the harshest enforcement. Some elderly residents, like the Rodriguez family, had borrowed against their homes to pay her fabricated fines. The stress had literally made people sick. Mrs. Patterson, the white veteran's widow, developed anxiety attacks after months of harassment, while the Martinez family's teenage son had started having panic attacks about losing their home. But here's what sealed Patricia's fate and exposed the full scope of her criminal enterprise. Tom found records showing she'd used the HOA credit card for personal expenses while funding her discrimination campaign. Spa treatments, vacation rentals, car payments, private investigator fees for background checks on minority residents, all funded with money stolen from neighbors who thought they were paying legitimate community fees. This isn't just civil fraud anymore, Tom said. We're talking criminal charges, wire fraud, racketeering, embezzlement, and federal civil rights violations. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is going to want to talk to us. The smooth surface of my grandfather's kitchen table felt solid under my palms as the full scope of Patricia's crimes became clear. She hadn't just targeted my family because of our race. She'd been systematically robbing and terrorizing the entire community while specifically weaponizing racism to drive out minority families. That night, I sat on the cabin porch, listening to owls call across the dark water, their voices echoing like warnings from the past. The crisp October air carried the scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace, mixing with the earthy smell of fallen leaves. My grandfather always said that racists count on good people staying quiet and scared, letting evil hide behind paperwork and politeness. But sometimes a racist picks on the wrong person at exactly the right moment, when all their lies are about to collapse anyway, and the community is ready to fight back together. Patricia thought she was fighting one stubborn black construction worker over a piece of lakefront property while running a profitable discrimination scheme. She was actually fighting an entire community that was about to discover they'd been robbed blind by their trusted leader, and that her neighborhood improvement campaign was really a racist money-making operation designed to drive out families like mine. The real battle was about to begin, and this time it would be fought in federal court under civil rights law. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when Tom Rodriguez called, his voice tight with the kind of excitement civil rights lawyers get when they find the smoking gun that proves everything. "Darius, you need to sit down for this," he said. "My paralegal just finished the deep dive into your HOA's financial records and communications, and what we've found is going to blow this case wide open. I was installing new gutters on a client's house, but I climbed down the ladder and found a quiet spot behind my truck. The metallic taste of anticipation filled my mouth as I waited for Tom to drop the bomb that would change everything. Your HOA collected $485,000 from residents over 3 years, he began. But here's the kicker. Only $190,000 remains in the account. That's nearly $300,000 missing, and the electronic trail leads straight to systematic discrimination for profit. The numbers hit like a sledgehammer to the gut. That wasn't just skimming or poor bookkeeping. That was systematic theft on a massive scale with a racist agenda. "Where did it go?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer would make my blood boil. "Patricia's personal accounts show suspicious deposits matching HOA withdrawal dates exactly," Tom continued. "Wire transfers, cashier's checks, even direct deposits disguised as consulting fees for demographic transition services. She's been looting the community fund like her personal piggy bank while running a discrimination operation." But the financial fraud was just the beginning of what Tom's investigation had uncovered. The real conspiracy behind Patricia's harassment campaign was even more sinister than we'd imagined. Remember that development company your friend Marcus mentioned? Lakeshore Properties paid Patricia $75,000 last month as a community liaison fee. We've got bank records showing the payment came 2 days after she ramped up enforcement actions against you and 4 other minority property owners. What would you do if you discovered your trusted community leader was being paid to drive out families who looked like you? The pieces of Patricia's scheme crystallized with sickening clarity. Lakeshore specialized in what they called community optimization, partnering with corrupt HOA boards to systematically harass minority residents until they sold their properties cheap, then flipping them for massive profits to white buyers seeking premium demographics. Patricia would target families who couldn't afford prolonged legal battles, especially minorities who faced additional barriers in the justice system, Tom explained. Then Lakeshore would swoop in with lowball offers on distressed properties, market them as exclusively maintained communities, and flip them for 200 and 300% profit margins. "They've done this in 5 other counties," Tom continued, papers shuffling in the background. "Same pattern every time. Corrupt HOA official creates fake violations with discriminatory enforcement. Minority families get overwhelmed by legal costs and social pressure. Properties get sold for pennies on the dollar. Then Lakeshore flips them for massive profits while bragging about improving neighborhood character." My grandfather's cabin was just one piece of a much larger puzzle designed to systematically remove Black and Latino families from desirable lakefront areas. Lakeshore wanted 6 specific minority-owned properties for a luxury resort development marketed as Heritage Lake Estates, where tradition meets excellence. The projected profit was $25 million once they controlled enough contiguous shoreline to claim exclusive community standards. Patricia's promise cut was $750,000, enough to pay off her debts and disappear before anyone realized they'd been victimized by organized discrimination disguised as community improvement. But here's where she got too greedy, Tom said with satisfaction. She's been filing fake incorporation documents with the court system, claiming legal authority she never had while specifically targeting minority families. Every legal filing she's made compounds the fraud charges and adds federal civil rights violations. The scope of Patricia's criminal enterprise was staggering and heartbreaking. 43 families had been systematically robbed over 3 years, with minority families facing enforcement rates 300% higher than white families for identical violations. Elderly residents like Rosa's neighbor Miguel Santos had borrowed against their home equity to pay fabricated fines designed to force them out. The stress had literally hospitalized 3 residents with heart problems, all of them people of color, who'd been targeted with Patricia's harshest tactics. Some families had already cracked under the pressure of fighting both financial strain and racial hostility. The Morrison cottage that sold last year for half its market value was purchased by a Lakeshore shell company. The black sellers never knew they were being manipulated into financial distress by their own HOA president as part of a larger demographic cleansing operation. "This isn't about your cabin anymore, Darius," Tom said quietly. "This is about protecting an entire community from organized crime disguised as neighborhood improvement, with racial discrimination as the primary weapon. Are you ready for what happened next?" The bitter October wind whipped through the construction site as Tom explained our next steps. Criminal referrals to the district attorney and FBI Civil Rights Division. Federal charges for wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Asset freezing orders to recover the stolen money and shut down the discrimination network. But most importantly, we were going to expose everything publicly. Every resident deserved to know they'd been victimized by a woman they'd trusted to protect their community, while minority families deserved to know they'd been specifically targeted because of their race. Patricia thought she was running a sophisticated real estate scam with plausible deniability about her racial motivations. She was actually building the case that would send her to federal prison for civil rights violations, and the entire community was about to find out exactly what their HOA president had been doing with their money while systematically targeting their minority neighbors. The next phase would determine whether justice could triumph over organized racism in small-town America. Tom Rodriguez's law office became our war room, and this time we had federal civil rights law on our side. Tom Rodriguez's law office became our war room, and the conference table disappeared under stacks of financial records, property deeds, discriminatory communications, and evidence files that looked like something from a federal civil rights investigation, which, as it turned out, was exactly what this was becoming. "We need to coordinate 4 separate tracks," Tom explained, spreading out a timeline across the polished wood surface. Criminal charges, civil rights violations, community recovery, and protection from retaliation. If we do this right, we can shut down Patricia's operation, recover every stolen dollar, and make sure this kind of discrimination gets prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law. The first call went to District Attorney Sarah Butler, a prosecutor who'd built her career on civil rights cases and white-collar crime. Tom had worked with her before on discriminatory HOA practices that crossed into federal territory. $500,000 in theft, organized harassment with clear racial targeting, conspiracy with developers to manipulate property values through demographic engineering, Tom summarized during their phone conference. This is exactly the kind of case that needs to set an example about civil rights enforcement. DA Butler agreed to fast-track the criminal investigation while coordinating with federal authorities. Within 48 hours, forensic accountants and FBI civil rights investigators would be examining every HOA transaction and communication going back 5 years, looking specifically for patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Meanwhile, I was building the community response network with a focus on protecting the families Patricia had targeted. My first stop was the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, where my grandfather's old army buddies still gathered every Thursday night. These guys had fought for civil rights and against fascism overseas, They weren't intimidated by suburban legal threats disguised as community improvement. Samuel's grandson needs help with a neighborhood problem that's gotten racial, announced Roy Patterson, my grandfather's foxhole buddy from Vietnam. The room went dead quiet as I explained Patricia's scheme and the discriminatory targeting. By the end of my presentation, 28 veterans had volunteered for security patrols and documentation support. Here's what you need to understand about retired military guys who fought for freedom. They're excellent at gathering intelligence and maintaining surveillance, skills that transfer perfectly to fighting discrimination and HOA corruption. We didn't fight overseas so racists could steal American families' homes, Roy said grimly. Rosa emerged as our unofficial community organizer, and her decades as a school principal had taught her how to manage large groups while maintaining detailed records. More importantly, every neighbor trusted her completely, regardless of their race or background. I've been documenting Patricia's harassment for months, she explained, opening a filing cabinet that looked like FBI evidence storage. Photos, recordings, copies of threatening letters, and especially the patterns showing how she targeted minority families with different standards. The depth of Patricia's systematic abuse was staggering when organized by race and ethnicity. 43 families had been targeted over 3 years, but minority families faced enforcement rates 300% higher than white families for identical violations. The average illegal extraction from white families was $2,100. The average from Black and Latino families was $7,300. Patricia had been running a profitable discrimination operation disguised as community standards. Marcus's private investigator cousin provided the technical expertise we needed to build an ironclad civil rights case. Professional-grade surveillance equipment, financial tracking software, and most importantly, contacts in federal law enforcement who specialized in organized discrimination and housing rights violations. Your HOA president made one crucial mistake, PI Tony Martinez explained. She got lazy with digital security and left electronic trails of her discriminatory communications. Every racist transaction, every biased enforcement decision, every conversation about demographic targeting, it's all permanently recorded and recoverable. The evidence was overwhelming, but we needed a strategy for maximum impact that would protect the community and prevent racial retaliation. Random accusations wouldn't work against someone with Patricia's connections and willingness to use coded language. We needed coordinated exposure that would make cover-ups impossible while ensuring federal oversight. Our plan crystallized around 3 key elements: legal action with civil rights focus, media exposure, highlighting the discrimination, and community mobilization that crossed racial lines. Tom would file emergency motions to freeze all HOA assets and prevent Patricia from accessing any remaining funds while pursuing federal civil rights charges. The goal was to preserve whatever money hadn't already been stolen, then recover the rest through criminal asset forfeiture and civil rights penalties. For media strategy, we contacted Janet Washington at the state newspaper, no relation to me, but a black journalist who specialized in investigative reporting on housing discrimination and had won awards for exposing municipal racism. This is exactly the kind of story that exposes how modern discrimination operates, Janet said after reviewing our evidence files. HOA fraud targeting minority families is happening everywhere, but most people don't know how to fight back or don't have the resources. Your case could help families across the state understand their rights. We scheduled a coordinated media blitz, newspaper investigation, TV news interviews focusing on civil rights violations, and social media campaign highlighting discriminatory enforcement patterns. The goal was to create so much public attention that Patricia couldn't intimidate witnesses or destroy evidence, while educating other communities about recognizing discrimination disguised as neighborhood improvement. But the most important element was community healing across racial lines. 43 families had been victimized, isolated, and made to feel powerless, with minority families bearing the heaviest burden of discriminatory enforcement. We needed to bring everyone together and show them they weren't alone in fighting organized racism disguised as community standards. Zoe came up with the perfect solution: a community civil rights memorial garden on the disputed property boundary. Instead of fighting over property lines, we'd create something that honored all local veterans while establishing permanent community ownership of the space and celebrating our neighborhood's diversity. Grandpa Samuel would love this, she said, sketching designs that incorporated plants native to different cultures represented in our community. He always said the best way to beat racists is to build something better than what they're trying to tear down, and show them that different people can work together. The Memorial Garden project gave us legitimate grounds for community meetings, volunteer coordination, and media attention that crossed racial lines. More importantly, it shifted the narrative from angry neighbors fighting HOA corruption to a diverse community honoring veterans while fighting discrimination and building unity. By Friday afternoon, our coalition included 28 veterans, 43 victim families from multiple ethnic backgrounds, 4 local attorneys, 3 private investigators, the District Attorney's Office, FBI Civil Rights Division, and a very determined 15-year-old with architectural drafting skills and a passion for justice. Patricia thought she was dealing with one stubborn black construction worker who could be intimidated with racist tactics and legal threats. She was about to face an entire multiracial community, armed with evidence, federal civil rights law, and a righteous cause that would expose her discrimination operation to national scrutiny. The countdown to justice had officially begun, and this time it would be fought on the battlefield of civil rights with federal oversight. Patricia's desperation reached new heights when she realized her carefully constructed fraud and discrimination operation was unraveling faster than a cheap roof in a tornado. Monday morning brought the first sign of her panic, an emergency notice claiming the HOA was being voluntarily dissolved due to administrative restructuring and demographic compatibility concerns. Translation: she was trying to grab whatever money remained and disappear before criminal charges and federal civil rights investigations destroyed her life. But Tom Rodriguez had anticipated this move and had federal authorities monitoring her accounts. By noon, we had an emergency court order freezing all HOA bank accounts and preventing any asset transfers, while the FBI Civil Rights Division opened their investigation. Patricia's escape plan died before it could take its first breath, and that's when she shifted tactics from financial fraud to outright character assassination with racist undertones that would prove her undoing. Tuesday evening, I came home from a job site to find my neighbor Carl waiting in my driveway, his face grim as a funeral director's. "Darius, you need to see this," he said, handing me a photocopied flyer that made my blood pressure spike into the stratosphere. These were on every windshield in the grocery store parking lot, and someone's been putting them in mailboxes in the white neighborhoods. The flyer featured a grainy photo of my cabin with bold text screaming, "Dangerous neighbor alert, protect your community." According to Patricia's anonymous propaganda, I was a mentally unstable individual with gang connections and history of violent threats who poses immediate danger to neighborhood safety and property values. The lies were breathtaking in their racist creativity and designed to tap into every stereotype about black men. I supposedly had a criminal record for assault, completely fabricated. I kept suspicious chemicals and weapons in my workshop, wood stain, power tools, and my grandfather's military memorabilia. I had made terroristic threats against community leaders, demanding they follow actual laws and stop discriminating. But here's where Patricia's racism made her sloppy. She'd used coded language that made her discriminatory intent crystal clear. References to urban crime patterns, demographic threats to community safety, and protecting traditional neighborhood character peppered throughout the flyer. Any civil rights attorney would recognize this as textbook racial fear-mongering. What Patricia didn't expect was for her smear campaign to backfire spectacularly when she tried to bribe key witnesses into supporting her racist version of events. Rosa knocked on my door Wednesday morning with news that made me grin like a wolf spotting wounded prey. "She offered me $5,000, Rosa whispered, glancing around like we were discussing state secrets. "Wanted me to sign a statement saying you'd been harassing elderly residents with threatening urban behavior and making culturally inappropriate demands." The woman actually used those exact words. The bribery attempt was captured on Rosa's phone recorder because spending 25 years managing teenagers teaches you to document everything. Patricia's voice was clear as church bells, offering cash for false testimony, specifically designed to play on racial fears and stereotypes. "But here's the really stupid part," Rosa continued with satisfaction. "She tried the same thing with 6 other neighbors, all of them people she thought would be afraid of black families. Every single one of them compared notes and refused. She's offering a total of $25,000. She doesn't have to create fake witnesses for crimes that never happened, using language that proves her racist motivations." Meanwhile, our security cameras were documenting Patricia's increasingly unhinged behavior that revealed her true character. She drove past my cabin 23 times on Thursday alone, sometimes stopping to take photos while talking animatedly on her phone, other times just sitting in her Lexus, staring at the property like she was planning something destructive. At 3:17 a.m. Friday morning, she finally snapped in a way that would end her criminal career forever. I woke up to the sharp sound of breaking glass and the acrid smell of spray paint fumes mixed with something that made my blood run cold. My security system was buzzing like an angry beehive, motion detectors lighting up the entire property perimeter. The infrared cameras captured everything in crystal clear detail. Patricia, dressed in dark clothing, spray painting racial slurs across my grandfather's workshop in huge red letters. She'd also smashed windows and scattered what looked like drug paraphernalia and gang-related items around the property entrance, including bandanas and fake weapons designed to trigger every racist stereotype about black families. Her plan was as transparent as it was evil: create evidence of gang activity and drug dealing, call in an anonymous tip about dangerous urban elements threatening neighborhood safety, trigger a police raid that would justify everything she'd been claiming about demographic threats, then use the resulting chaos to push through emergency property seizure. But Patricia had made a crucial mistake that would send her to federal prison. She hadn't disabled my security system first, and she'd been stupid enough to shout racial slurs while committing her crimes. Every second of her hate-fueled vandalism spree was recorded from 3 different angles, including clear facial recognition shots and audio of her using language that proved discriminatory intent beyond any doubt. I called 911 immediately, then Tom Rodriguez, then Sheriff Deputy Mike Harrison, who'd been monitoring the situation since our criminal complaint was filed. The FBI Civil Rights Division had also been alerted due to the federal nature of the discrimination charges. This woman just graduated from fraud and discrimination to federal hate crimes, Deputy Harrison said, reviewing the security footage in my kitchen while Patricia sat handcuffed in his patrol car, still screaming about protecting the neighborhood from urban invasion, plus breaking and entering, vandalism, evidence planting, filing false police reports, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. She's looking at serious federal prison time. The planted evidence was particularly damning because it was so obviously fake and racially motivated. Empty drug baggies that still had Patricia's fingerprints on them, spray-painted gang symbols that she'd clearly copied from internet searches, and racial slurs written in her own distinctive handwriting that matched samples from HOA documents. Even if the security cameras hadn't caught her red-handed, the physical evidence would have pointed straight back to her, and the racist nature of her frame-up attempt would have triggered federal hate crime investigations anyway. By sunrise Friday, news of Patricia's arrest for federal hate crimes was spreading through the community faster than wildfire in August. The local paper ran a front-page story with the headline, HOA President Arrested for Racist Harassment Campaign. Janet Washington's investigation had uncovered even more damaging information about Patricia's history of discrimination in other states. She'd been forced to leave Connecticut after complaints about discriminatory real estate practices, had her law license suspended in California for bias-related trust account violations, and had been quietly asked to resign from a Florida HOA board after allegations of racist, selective enforcement. The woman who'd terrorized our community with legal threats disguised as neighborhood improvement was actually a serial discriminator who specialized in small-town fraud schemes targeting minority families. But even facing multiple federal charges, including hate crimes, Patricia wasn't finished. Desperate racists with nothing left to lose become unpredictably dangerous, and she still had allies willing to help her fight back, using the oldest weapons in America: fear, money, and coded appeals to racial prejudice. The final battle was about to begin, and this time the gloves were completely off. Patricia's arrest for federal hate crimes should have ended the nightmare, but desperate criminals with deep pockets and racial prejudices don't go quietly into that good night. Within 12 hours of her booking, she'd posted the $500,000 federal bail through a bondsman connected to far-right legal defense funds and hired Blackstone Crisis Management, the kind of reputation laundering outfit that charges $100,000 to make discrimination scandals disappear using racial dog whistles and coded messaging. Their counterattack came swift and vicious, designed to tap into every racial fear and stereotype about black families. Monday morning brought anonymous robocalls to every household in 5 zip codes, featuring a computerized voice claiming I was the real criminal in a conspiracy to manipulate racial tensions for financial gain while bringing urban crime patterns to peaceful suburban communities. The calls urged residents to demand the truth about Darius Washington's gang connections and drug-related activities, while protecting their families and property values from demographic threats. Simultaneously, fake social media accounts began spreading lies faster than wildfire in August, using professionally designed graphics that showed doctored photos of my cabin with captions about crack house operations and terrorist planning meetings targeting white families. My construction business Yelp page was flooded with one-star reviews claiming I'd stolen tools, threatened white customers with racially motivated violence, and performed shoddy work that deliberately endangered suburban families. The reviews all used similar coded language about urban work habits and cultural incompatibility that made their coordinated racist nature obvious. But Patricia's crisis management team made a fatal error that would destroy any remaining credibility they had. They went after my daughter. Tuesday afternoon, Zoe came home from school in tears, clutching a letter from the principal, requesting an emergency meeting about concerning reports regarding home environment and potential gang exposure of a minor child. Someone had called the school district claiming I was psychologically unstable with urban gang connections and keeping dangerous weapons and drug-related materials around a vulnerable teenage girl. They'd also reported that Zoe was frequently absent and showing signs of neglect typical of unstable urban family environments. Are you ready for what happened when they targeted a black teenager with racist lies? The metallic taste of pure rage filled my mouth as I read that letter, but this time it was rage channeled into laser-focused determination. Going after me was one thing, but targeting my 15-year-old daughter with racist stereotypes crossed every line that mattered. That's when our multiracial community coalition shifted into full war mode with federal civil rights backing. Within hours, Roy Patterson's veteran network had identified the crisis management firm's local operatives and documented their use of racist messaging patterns that violated federal hate crime statutes. These corporate mercenaries thought they could intimidate a diverse community that included guys who'd fought against fascism overseas and racism at home. Roy growled, his weathered hands steady as a sniper's as he organized surveillance schedules. They're about to learn what real resistance looks like when you target our children with racist lies. Meanwhile, Rosa had mobilized every teacher, parent, and school board member in the district, along with civil rights organizations that had been monitoring our case. Principal Morrison received 67 phone calls in one day, all from respected community members of different races, vouching for my character and Zoe's well-being, while demanding investigation of the racist false reports. That girl is one of our best students, Morrison told me during our meeting, his anger barely controlled. Honor roll, volunteer tutor, never missed a day without legitimate excuse, and one of our most thoughtful students on issues of social justice. Whoever made those reports was either completely misinformed or deliberately targeting your family with racist lies. We're closing any investigation immediately and referring this to federal authorities as a hate crime. The Child Protective Services investigation lasted exactly 90 minutes. Social worker Amanda Rodriguez, a Latina woman who'd seen every kind of family situation, took one look at our clean, well-maintained cabin filled with books and family photos, reviewed Zoe's academic records, and interviewed 5 neighbors of different ethnic backgrounds who'd known our family for years. Mr. Washington, this appears to be a malicious report designed to harass your family using racist stereotypes, Rodriguez concluded with professional anger. We're closing the case immediately and flagging the complaint as a racially motivated false report. The FBI Civil Rights Division will want copies of our files. But the real turning point came when Tom Rodriguez's forensic accountant discovered Patricia's offshore banking scheme that exposed the full scope of her criminal enterprise. Hidden in a Cayman Islands shell company called Community Enhancement Solutions, LLC, was $420,000, nearly all the money stolen from HOA residents over 3 years, plus payments from Lakeshore Properties for demographic transition services. Wire transfer records showed the funds had been moved in small increments to avoid federal reporting requirements. a classic money laundering technique combined with evidence of conspiracy to violate civil rights through housing discrimination. She's been planning this racist escape scheme for months, Tom explained, as we reviewed the banking records in his office. Small transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, and payments specifically tied to removing minority families from the neighborhood. This wasn't opportunistic fraud. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise designed to profit from racial discrimination. Even better, the IRS and FBI Financial Crimes Division had been monitoring suspicious banking activity connected to Community Enhancement Solutions, LLC, as part of a larger investigation into discrimination-based money laundering. Patricia wasn't just facing state fraud charges anymore. She was looking at federal tax evasion, money laundering, racketeering, and civil rights conspiracy charges that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences of 10 to 20 years. By Thursday, her crisis management team had quietly terminated their contract after discovering the federal civil rights charges and offshore money laundering evidence. Blackstone specialized in managing scandals and manufacturing racial narratives, not defending serial criminals facing decades in federal prison for hate crimes and financial conspiracy. Patricia made one final desperate play Friday evening that revealed the full depths of her racism and criminal intent. She called Tom Rodriguez directly, offering to return half the stolen money and provide information about other discrimination schemes in exchange for reduced charges and a sealed plea agreement that would keep her crimes out of public records. She wants to make a deal, Tom told me over the phone. 50% restitution, minimum security prison, sealed records, and a gag order preventing anyone from discussing her discrimination operation publicly. She's also offering to expose other HOAs running similar schemes targeting minority families. The offer was insulting on multiple levels, asking crime victims to take a 50-cent on the dollar loss while protecting a racist criminal's reputation, plus helping her maintain the secrecy that allowed discrimination to flourish in the first place. What did you tell her? I asked, already knowing Tom's answer would make me proud, that she's going to face every charge, return every dollar, serve serious federal prison time, and do it all in front of the entire community she victimized with racist targeting, Tom replied. Some crimes are too serious for backroom deals, especially civil rights violations. The community deserves to see justice served publicly. The sound of night birds calling across the lake drifted through my cabin windows as Friday night settled over our embattled but united community. Tomorrow was the federal civil rights hearing where everything would be exposed publicly, including the discrimination scheme that had targeted minority families for systematic financial abuse. After months of harassment, lies, racist intimidation, and attempts to frame my family with stereotypes, federal justice was finally coming to Willowbrook. Patricia Whitmore was about to discover what happens when racist criminals target the wrong community at exactly the moment when America decides to enforce civil rights law with the full power of federal prosecution. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you grateful to live in an America where civil rights law still means something. By 9 a.m., cars were already lining up outside the Willowbrook Community Center, and by 10:30, the parking lot looked like a civil rights rally. The community center hadn't seen this kind of crowd since the integration celebrations in the 1960s. Every seat was filled with standing room only along the walls, and the crowd was beautifully diverse. Black, white, Latino, Asian, and Native American families standing together against discrimination. Local media had set up cameras in the back, while national civil rights organizations positioned themselves near the front, ready to document federal justice in action. District Attorney Sarah Butler sat at the head table, alongside Sheriff Deputy Mike Harrison and FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres, whose presence sent whispers of satisfaction rippling through the crowd. When federal civil rights agents show up to small-town meetings, everyone knows serious crimes against constitutional rights are about to be addressed with the full power of federal law. Patricia arrived 30 minutes late with her lone remaining attorney, Marcus Webb, both of them looking like people who'd rather be anywhere else in America. She'd traded her usual power suit for conservative navy blue, but her hands shook as she clutched a legal folder thick with desperate, last-minute motions designed to avoid federal prison time. Tom Rodriguez stood to address the packed room, his voice carrying clearly over the murmur of anxious neighbors ready to hear the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because your HOA president has been systematically defrauding this community for over 3 years, while specifically targeting minority families for discriminatory enforcement, he began, as a large screen descended behind him. What you're about to see will shock you, but it will also explain why minority families faced enforcement rates 300% higher than white families, and why your HOA fees kept rising while community services disappeared into offshore accounts. The first slide showed Patricia's banking records, $485,000 collected from residents with discriminatory enforcement patterns, but only $190,000 remaining in official accounts. Gasps echoed through the room as the full scope of the theft became clear, with charts showing how minority families had been systematically overcharged. Mrs. Rodriguez, sitting in the front row with her oxygen tank, whispered, "Dios mío," loud enough for everyone to hear as the discriminatory targeting became undeniable. "Where did the missing money go?" Tom continued, clicking to the next slide that would change everything. Patricia Whitmore's personal bank accounts, credit card payments, spa treatments, vacation rentals, and $75,000 in payments from Lakeshore Properties for demographic transition services, specifically removing minority families from this neighborhood. The crowd's murmur shifted to angry muttering as neighbors realized they'd been paying for Patricia's lifestyle, while she systematically targeted their Black and Latino neighbors for harassment designed to force them out. But the real bombshell came when Tom displayed the security footage from my property. "This is your HOA president at 3:17 a.m. last Friday, spray painting racial slurs on a veteran's property and planting fake evidence of gang activity to frame an innocent black family," Tom announced, as the crystal-clear infrared video played on the big screen, complete with audio of Patricia's racist rants. The room erupted. Shouts of "federal prison" and "civil rights criminal" filled the air while Patricia sat frozen, watching her midnight hate crime spree broadcast to the entire community she'd terrorized with racist targeting for years. That's when elderly Miguel Santos, using his walker for support, slowly stood to address the room with dignity that silenced everyone. "This woman made me mortgage my home to pay her fake fines because I'm Mexican," he said, his voice trembling with emotion and righteous anger. "35 years I lived in this community as a proud American citizen. Then she came along and told me my family's flags were culturally inappropriate, and my garden shed needed $25,000 in permits she never required from white families." One by one, victims stood to share their stories of discriminatory targeting. The Morrison family, forced to sell their cottage after months of racist harassment disguised as community standards. Young Latino parents who'd borrowed against retirement savings to pay fabricated violations that white families never faced. Elderly black residents hospitalized with stress-related heart problems after enduring Patricia's systematic racism. 43 families, over $400,000 stolen. 3 years of systematic discrimination disguised as neighborhood improvement. The pattern was undeniable and heartbreaking. Patricia finally attempted to speak, her voice barely audible above the crowd's righteous anger. "These are misunderstandings based on legitimate community standards," she began, but FBI Special Agent Torres cut her off immediately with federal authority. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent under federal civil rights law. I strongly suggest you use it." Agent Torres stood to address the community directly with the full weight of federal justice behind her words. "Based on evidence gathered over the past month by the FBI Civil Rights Division, we are filing 31 federal charges against Patricia Whitmore, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and federal hate crimes." The formal announcement drew thunderous applause that lasted nearly 10 minutes, with families of all backgrounds standing together in celebration of justice. FBI Agent Torres added the federal civil rights dimension that made this case historically significant. "Mrs. Whitmore used wire transfers and mail fraud to move stolen funds across state lines, while systematically targeting minority families for discriminatory enforcement. She faces additional federal charges under the Civil Rights Act that carry mandatory minimum sentences of 10 to 20 years in federal prison." But the moment that crystallized everything, the true mic drop that everyone would remember for generations, came when Roy Patterson, my grandfather's old army buddy, stood with a folded American flag, and spoke with the authority of 6 decades fighting for civil rights. Samuel Washington's grandson didn't just fight for his family's property, Roy announced, his voice carrying the weight of history and sacrifice. He fought for every family in this room, regardless of color, and he fought for the civil rights that make America worth defending. That's what real Americans do. We protect each other from people who abuse power and target families because of their race. He handed me the flag that had flown over the state capitol in honor of all local veterans who'd fought for civil rights and constitutional equality. Your grandfather would be proud, son. You didn't just defend his land, you defended his values and the civil rights he fought to protect. The standing ovation lasted 15 minutes, with neighbors of all backgrounds applauding together. Families who'd been afraid to speak out for years about racist targeting finally felt safe and validated. Elderly residents who'd been isolated by discriminatory harassment discovered they weren't alone. Children saw their parents standing up for justice and equality. Patricia Whitmore sat silent, watching her kingdom of lies and racial hatred collapse in front of 400 witnesses, 4 news cameras, and federal civil rights investigators taking notes for her prosecution. Justice had finally come to Willowbrook, served with small-town determination, and witnessed by everyone who mattered under the protection of federal civil rights law that makes targeting families because of their race a serious federal crime. 6 months later, the sound of a federal judge's gavel echoed through the courthouse as Patricia Whitmore was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $3.2 million in restitution, including civil rights penalties that ensured every victim would be made whole and then some. Mrs. Whitmore, you violated the sacred trust communities place in their elected leaders while systematically targeting minority families for discriminatory harassment, Judge Morrison declared, with the full authority of federal civil rights law behind her words. Your organized discrimination operation represents the worst kind of abuse of power and constitutional violations. Federal civil rights law exists specifically to prevent and punish the kind of systematic racism you perpetrated against innocent American families. All stolen funds were recovered through criminal asset forfeiture, including money hidden in Caribbean accounts that Patricia thought would never be found by federal investigators. Every resident received full refunds plus 24% interest, transforming lives overnight and providing additional compensation for the trauma of discriminatory targeting. Miguel Santos paid off his emergency mortgage and took his family on their first vacation to visit relatives in Mexico they hadn't seen in years. The Rodriguez family used their restitution to send their daughter to college with a full scholarship fund. But the real transformation ran deeper than dollars and cents. It was about a community learning to stand together against racism and discrimination. Our Veterans Day Civil Rights Memorial Garden dedication drew over 800 attendees, including Governor Patricia Williams and Senator James Rodriguez, who spoke about ordinary citizens showing extraordinary courage in defending constitutional rights. The sweet scent of apple cider and fresh donuts filled the crisp November air as 4 generations of veterans from multiple ethnic backgrounds saluted in formation. The garden itself exceeded every dream Zoe had sketched in her notebooks. Native wildflowers from different cultural traditions surrounded granite stones honoring all local veterans who'd fought for civil rights, while the central monument displayed Samuel's words, "This is our forever home. Nobody can take what you build with honest sweat, and nobody should be targeted because of the color of their skin." Standing there watching my daughter place flowers at Grandpa's memorial stone, feeling the smooth texture of polished granite warm under autumn sunshine, I experienced something I'd almost forgotten during months of legal battles and racist harassment, pure peace mixed with pride, in a community that had chosen justice over prejudice. The community impact spread far beyond our neighborhood and became a model for civil rights enforcement nationwide. Our case became the template for fighting discriminatory HOA practices under federal civil rights law, with Attorney General Martinez establishing a civil rights housing task force that investigated over 300 suspicious associations and recovered millions in stolen funds, while prosecuting dozens of discrimination cases. 5 similar schemes targeting minority families were exposed in other states, potentially saving thousands of families from financial devastation and racial harassment. The Willowbrook civil rights model is now taught in law schools as an example of effective grassroots legal resistance backed by federal constitutional protections. Zoe's college applications practically wrote themselves around her essay about fighting discrimination through community organizing and federal civil rights law. She earned 15 acceptance letters and merit scholarships, totaling $127,000, choosing Howard University's pre-law program with a simple explanation. I want to help people fight back against racism like Dad did, but with better understanding of civil rights law from the beginning. My relationship with my ex-wife healed in unexpected ways through our shared pride in Zoe's courage and our commitment to raising a daughter who stands up for justice. I always wondered if you'd fight for something bigger than yourself and our family, she admitted. Watching you protect 43 families from racist targeting while teaching Zoe about civil rights answered that question forever. The new Willowbrook Neighborhood Association focuses on genuine community improvement that celebrates our diversity, playground upgrades, multicultural scholarship funds, and an annual civil rights festival that draws visitors from 5 states. Property values increased 22% after positive media coverage highlighted our community's integrity, resilience, and commitment to equality. Tom Rodriguez launched a statewide civil rights education program using our case as the foundation, helping communities recognize discrimination warning signs and build effective resistance coalitions. We've personally consulted on dozens of similar battles, helping families understand their constitutional rights and federal protections against racist targeting. Documentary filmmaker Janet Washington won a national Emmy for Small Town Civil Rights, which showcased our story as proof that grassroots democracy and federal constitutional protections still work when diverse communities stand together against organized racism. Last month brought the final piece of justice that made everything complete. Lakeshore Properties was indicted on federal civil rights and racketeering charges for systematic discrimination operations across 6 states. Our little battle had helped expose a nationwide criminal enterprise that specifically targeted minority families for removal from desirable communities. Personal healing came slowly but surely, strengthened by the knowledge that we'd struck a blow against systematic racism that would protect other families for generations. Those hand-hewn porch railings Samuel built still feel solid under my palms every sunrise, as I drink coffee and watch golden light paint the peaceful lake. The sound of morning birds calling across calm water carries only tranquility now, mixed with the voices of neighborhood children playing together regardless of color, the dream my grandfather fought a war to protect. This morning's letter came from a family in Georgia facing similar discriminatory harassment. After a 2-hour phone conversation sharing everything we'd learned about civil rights law and community organizing, they felt ready to fight back with federal protections. Helping other families gives meaning to everything we endured and shows how one victory against racism can inspire justice nationwide. Every victory against discrimination strengthens constitutional democracy. Every community that stands together across racial lines makes racist bullies weaker and federal civil rights law stronger. Samuel Washington's grandson didn't just defend his grandfather's land, he helped protect families nationwide from systematic racism disguised as community improvement. The taste of morning coffee mixed with satisfaction and pride never gets old, especially when it comes with the knowledge that ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent about discrimination and understand that federal civil rights law exists to protect families like mine. Your turn to share and help other families facing similar battles. Drop your HOA discrimination story in the comments below, and let's build a community of people who understand their civil rights. What would you have done differently? Have you checked whether your HOA targets certain families with different standards? Your experience could help another family fight back against racist harassment. Hit that subscribe button for more civil rights stories that prove justice still works in America when communities stand together. We're building a movement of people who refuse to let corrupt boards steal homes and dreams while targeting families because of their race. Because sometimes the best way to honor the past is to fight for a future where every American family enjoys equal protection under law, regardless of color. Remember, discrimination only wins when good people stay quiet and federal civil rights law goes unenforced. Your voice matters more than you think, and the Constitution protects families like mine when communities have the courage to demand justice. You've been watching Civil Rights Stories, where racist bullies get federal justice and constitutional democracy wins. If this episode gave you hope for America or righteous satisfaction, hit that like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss stories about ordinary families defending extraordinary constitutional principles that make America worth fighting for.